Hi everyone, it's Tara Bianca with Be Light Transformative Therapy. And today I wanted to start sharing with you some hands-on tools to begin mobilizing the diaphragm and also the surrounding structures. So if that's interesting to you, stick around and we're going to get into the details. So I released this video on Tuesday, and while the intention of that video had nothing to do with diaphragmatic mobilization, the topic kind of organically came up during the conversation, and a few of you reached out to me saying, yes, definitely, I would love to hear more about how to use my own hands to start mobilizing this diaphragmatic area more, as well as the surrounding tissues. You know, when it comes to manual therapy techniques, there's an infinite number of things that we can do to the body, so I don't want to make this video too long or too overwhelming. I think what will probably happen is this will be a trial video. You guys can give me some feedback on if this is valuable, if you'd like more videos like this, and then maybe we'll turn it into a sort of mini video series. So let's consider this today, Diaphragmatic Mobility Part 1. But before we dive into the meat of things, so to speak, I have two really important points that I want to bring up, so please just try to pay attention for a couple minutes and then we'll jump into the hands-on techniques. Point number one is that we're going to be using our fingers to go into these areas of our body that are typically very guarded and not really easily accessed. We tend to protect these areas and not let people in so easily. Because of that, I need you guys to promise me a certain amount of self-responsibility and self-reliance today. I'm not there in the room with you. I can't really monitor how you're using your hands, what your depth is, what structure you're on. So I need you to promise me that you're going to be acutely aware and really pay attention to the sensations that you're feeling in your own body, what you're feeling, what you're experiencing in each moment. And so here are the rules, okay? If you get any kind of sharp, excruciating pain, that's a definite sign to remove your fingers, and maybe this is not the thing for you to be experimenting with today. If you get any numbness or tingling or weird nervy sensations, again, maybe we just need to remove the fingers and try a different exercise today, or maybe we need to adjust your placement a little bit. So I'll try to give as many cues as I can while we're going through this process, but I also really need you on board paying attention to the cues coming from your own body. In terms of contraindications, you know, a lot of it is going to depend on the constitution of you as the individual. But because, again, I'm not in the room with you, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to err on the side of caution and give you a list of things that I think it's important to look out for and consider before trying to do these manual techniques. I'm going to say that pregnancy is a no-go. I'm going to say that an aortic aneurysm is a definite no-go. Hopefully you know that you have that if you have that. High blood pressure or unchecked cardiovascular disease could be an issue. But if you have high blood pressure and you're on medication for it, and you have this medication that's sort of modulating and mitigating your pressure for you, I think you're going to be okay doing these simple exercises. If you currently have a fractured or a subluxed, partially dislocated rib, definitely stay away from these exercises today. I think that's going to be pretty intuitive. It would be so uncomfortable and you're going to be so guarded anyway, you'd never be able to get in there. Now, if you've had a fracture in the past, you know, it's sort of going to depend on you. In my experience working with clients with past rib fractures or rib subluxations, they're really guarded. They really don't like people going up under their rib cage or working around the ribs. They tend to be very sensitive and protective of the area. But in this case, you're using your own hands on your own body, and you've got a lot of information coming in through the fingers, but you also have all this sensory information coming from the body to the brain. So you're a little bit more easily able to moderate what you're doing. So I invite you to try it if you are recovering from past fracture and you have some scar tissue in there. But again, if it's uncomfortable, sharp pain, numbness, maybe this is not the thing to be doing today. Osteoporosis or osteopenia, particularly if you know for a fact that bone density is diminished in the rib cage itself or in the axial skeleton. Definitely don't go mobilizing the ribs and trying to go underneath the ribs. any kind of dysfunction with the lower esophageal sphincter. So most of you who have that probably do know that you have some issue with that esophagus and the closure going into the stomach. I could see this going either way. You know, worst case scenario, you try it and you get a mild flare-up of symptoms, but best case scenario, you try it and maybe it creates a positive change. So it really depends what's going on in the sphincter itself, why that is weak, why it's not closing completely, and what's going on with the surrounding tissues. So you'd really need to work one-on-one with a practitioner to get a clearer sense of it, but I'm not totally opposed to you trying these simple techniques today. They could be beneficial, but know that there's also a potential for them to not be so great. We are going to be going up under the rib cage today. So we're going to be accessing a lot of the internal organs as well as addressing the diaphragm directly. So if there's any inflammation in any of the organ structures that you're unaware of, it can get super uncomfortable. I'm thinking as we go to the right side here, it's very easy to palpate your liver and even your gallbladder. So if there's any issues going on in those organs, you will feel it. Is it a bad thing? Is it a complete contraindication? Definitely not. But if this is the first time that you're really approaching touching your organs directly, it could be very uncomfortable and it might kick up some negative symptoms for a while. So if you're looking to avoid that, maybe save this work for working one-on-one with a skilled and licensed practitioner. But if you're a little bit adventurous and you want to try it, you can just be mindful. Again, coming out if there's any sharp acute pain and if there's any numbness, tingling, or adverse symptoms. And then the last thing I want to mention is any abdominal surgeries and hernias. So this is again going to be on a person-by-person case, depending what the surgery was, depending where the hernia was, if there's mesh in there, or what is going on. I would say for most abdominal surgeries, there's probably a fair amount of scar tissue, and starting to mobilize some of these surrounding areas might be really helpful actually. You know, especially if that scar tissue has never been directly addressed. Typically, scar tissue over time constricts more and more and more and more and can cause its own set of symptoms, right? It can cause its own muscular imbalance and fascial pulls and adhesions and cause all kinds of different referral pain around the body. So if there has been a surgery, addressing that surgical scar directly would be nice. And also directing the surrounding tissues can be really nice to potentially loosen any adhesions that might be pinning that area and keeping you stuck. In terms of the hernia, it's a little bit different because that hernia is already a sign of some kind of abdominal wall weakness. There was a weakness there in the first place that started to create this opening, right? So if there's mesh in there or if there's not mesh in there, if you know you just have a hernia, I'm of two minds about it. In some ways, I think we need to release everything around that hernia in order to give a little bit more freedom to that area so that it doesn't keep getting strained, that it doesn't keep experiencing stress, and so that it doesn't add to the weakness of that area. However, because this is sort of a general treatment today, and I don't, again, know exactly where your dysfunction or weakness is, you just want to be really mindful. Even if it's an inguinal hernia down in the groin area, you'll see immediately that when we do mobilization under the rib cage, you're going to feel it instantaneously to that anterior hip and to that inguinal space. So there is a really strong connection. So if you're feeling uncertain about it, I would say hold off for today, or maybe watch the exercises first and kind of process, is this something that I want to do or not, before you jump right into it. Okay, that was a long list of precautions, and if I have any practitioners watching this video and some other contraindications jump to your mind, I'm sure there are some. I would really appreciate it if you guys could drop those in the comments, or if anyone watching is feeling uncertain or has questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me and ask, and let's try to figure it out together. The other thing I want to say related to our precautions is that the fingernail length is going to be a critical component of this treatment. So as manual therapists, we really keep our nails extremely short. And when I say short, I mean like no white. So maybe you can see I just cut my fingernails and they're really buffered down. So for this treatment that we're going to be learning today, we're definitely going up under the rib cage and sinking into the soft tissues of our abdomen and working around the organs a little bit. If you have any nail at all, you're going to feel it. It's going to be distracting. It's going to be uncomfortable. So I highly recommend that you cut them as short as you're comfortable doing and even file them. I'm working directly on the skin for this demonstration, just so that you guys can see a little bit more clearly what I'm doing and where I'm placing my hands. But if for some reason you don't want to clip your nails so short, I would highly recommend that you wear a t-shirt or a thin sweater just to create that protective barrier that will allow you to sink in a little bit more deeply without resistance, without fighting, and you won't feel the nails and get that sense of discomfort. And then the second really important point that I wanted to address quickly is that as we're going through this session, I will inevitably throw out anatomical terms just because I can't help myself. And I will even try to include a couple images for you guys just so you can get a better lay of the land and really see, wow, it's really complex in this area. So you can have a better idea of what you're actually touching. But at the same time, for all my perfectionists out there and my recovering perfectionists, I'm just as guilty, by the way, so I get it. I don't want you to get too obsessive about where exactly is my hand? Am I off by a half an inch? What am I touching? As soon as you go into, am I doing it right? You completely come out of your body and then nothing is happening. So I would rather invite you today to kind of come on this journey with me, and we'll do a call and response style session. And I'm going to ask that you really try to be a little bit more intuitive with what your hands are doing and more so focus on what you're feeling in your own body. And let that be more of your guide as opposed to trying to follow this precise anatomical chart. Okay, I think that was a long enough intro. If you're ready, we're going to jump in. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to address is this xiphoid fascia. So remember from other lessons that xiphoid is that little pointy bony piece that hangs off the bottom of the sternum. And this is normally a bony landmark that we're very cautious not to put a lot of pressure into, and the same will hold true for today. This technique that we're going to do is very light. So you find the bottom of your sternum, and you're right in the midline of the body. And now my pressure in this area literally is like this. And I'm just pulling almost, it feels like I'm just mobilizing the skin. We're really going for this superficial fascial layer. So it definitely doesn't look like this. I'm not going to be leaving fingerprints in my skin. It's a very light contact. My fingertips kind of melt into the skin, and I'm taking the tissue with me. So really light pressure. So I'm just bringing my index fingers to the midline of my body. So I'm where my ribs come up in a triangular shape. I'm right at the apex. And I'm just gently sinking into the tissue, so towards my spine, into my body, and now I'm giving a little outward pressure. So my hands are literally dragging apart from each other, but it's more of an intention. I'm not trying to slide across the skin. There's not that much tissue there to work with. I'm just sinking in towards my spine with light pressure, melting into that skin, and then I'm gently pulling my fingers apart. So my intention is just to spread my fingers, but I'm barely moving. However, just that little bit of movement, I feel a lot. So as you're going through this process, notice what your breathing starts to do. So my fingers, you see how they slightly moved apart? We're going to do that a couple times, just so you can get a feel for it. So release, come back to midline, right? So my fingertips are right at that apex. I sink back into the xiphoid itself, very gentle pressure, melt into that skin, and now I have this outward pressure with both hands. They're moving apart from each other, but so gently, so slowly. If your skin is too slippery, you're not going to get really good contact with the skin. You're just going to slide across it. So I would advise against not putting on a lot of lotion before you do work like this. Good, just gently spreading that xiphoid fascia. We're going to do it one more time. This is really superficial. We're just starting to get our hands kind of into the crux of it. One more time, bringing the fingertips to the apex. I hope you can see that. Sinking in towards the spine. And the rest of your body should be relaxed. Get the shoulders down away from your ears. Relax your posture, sinking in towards that little xiphoid bone. And now I'm pulling my fingers apart, spreading this tissue between the two halves of the rib cage. Good. Okay, so next I want to take a general spreading of this tissue underneath the rib cage. So that's where we're going to start to really access the diaphragm, right? The diaphragm comes from the front of the rib cage. It kind of arcs, umbrellas up, and it meets the ribs and the lumbar spine at the back. So I'll be sure to include a couple pictures because that was probably the worst description of a diaphragm I have ever articulated. But in any case, the diaphragm is not easily accessible, right? It's under the ribs. So even when we address it today, some of our addressing of the tissue will be slightly indirect, and some of it we'll just get a fingertip or two on the diaphragmatic fibers themselves. So a lot of it's going to be indirect work, working on that area, trying to release it. So the intention anyway, though, is to get under the ribs. So the first thing we're going to do before we go under them is to start to spread and soften this tissue, carving out the rib cage. So I like to take my finger pads, and again, this is why you want your nails short. If you don't have short fingernails, remember to keep a t-shirt or something, a thin sweater there, so that you have something to move across and create a barrier for yourself. So we're just going to start here's midline. I'm about an inch to either side, and I'm just going to start to spread my fingers. So here, maybe I can do this way. So you see how I'm starting to carve out the ribs a little bit? And I'm not dragging quickly. I'm just going to work on this part from the xiphoid process to about an inch to the side, just dragging that tissue, starting to spread it gently. Okay, you can see how the rib cage is getting carved out. But I'm not sinking under yet. I'm just carving out the ribs. Okay, now from here, I'm going to reset, dig in a little bit, and think about just dragging along the rib borders. And again, I'm going to reset, sink in a little, drag. We can really be thinking about our breathing here too, kind of multitasking. So if you guys have been watching my breathing videos, you can keep doing the same thing. We can focus on our good solid oral posture, keeping the lips gently sealed, a little bit of space between the teeth, tip of the tongue making gentle contact with the roof of the mouth right behind the top teeth without actually touching the teeth. And then quietly, slowly, gently breathing in and out through the nose. I'm not going to be able to do that with you because I have to be talking, so. Okay, good. So now we just did a little bit of a warming up of the tissue. So now we're going to start to kind of go underneath piece by piece. I'm going to tell you now that the central part is very congested. You have a lot of stuff going on here. Your esophagus is exiting here. The xiphoid is here. All these abdominal attachments are coming here. The greater curve of your stomach starts to come on this side. You've got liver stuff happening on this side. Big tendinous ligament attachments coming. So it's really congested and it can feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I want to highlight the difference between therapeutic pain and injurious pain. There is a difference. So tolerable discomfort, which feels a little bit like ugh, but not painful, just a little ugh, but I can tell if I keep doing this, it's going to feel better. That's therapeutic pain. If you get sharp, stabbing pain that refers other places in your body, or you literally start to feel something going numb or tingling, definitely back out. Okay, so this area is going to be a little bit more congested, a little bit harder to get into, but we're literally going to start to curve our fingers up under the rib cage. Again, gentle pressure. We're not trying to kill it here. This is not our most forceful hand technique ever. So sometimes I just bend back a little bit, grab under the ribs, just curl my fingers under, and you can even lean forward. And just pausing here for a minute, take a few breaths. And on the exhale, you can sink under more. So I'm really allowing gravity to help me here. Let me turn sideways a little. So I'm really allowing gravity here to help me drop my weight onto my fingers. Good. Good, so we were sort of at this central position. Let's move out a little bit more and do the same thing. So I inhale, I exhale, and I drop my weight onto my fingers. So I would advise against doing this right after a big meal. Not ideal. It won't feel good. You'll get real nauseous. You won't even really be able to get your fingers in there. It's easier to do this on an empty stomach or a couple hours after eating. So again, you can see how my fingers are disappearing under my rib cage. I'm just letting my body weight fall onto my fingers. So I'm kneeling on a mat right now. If that's not an option for you, you can do this seated in a chair, no problem. I'm just taking a couple breaths there. So a lot of the hands-on techniques that I like to do are just kind of pin the tissue and breathe. That's sort of my favorite way to work, and I find it remarkably effective. Okay, and then let's go out again. And now we're really trying to curl under the ribs. So it's always easier to get under there on an exhale. So take an inhale. Exhale. Fall onto the ribs. So now that we're moving out to the sides of the rib cage more, you should be able to feel like, oh, I can really sink in there now. Should feel easier to get in. Almost undoubtedly, the right side's going to feel more congested because you've got that big, massive liver there that's in your way. That's totally normal. The body is not symmetrical. We have these built-in asymmetries, and they're readily apparent when you start to do work like this. All right, so I'm under there and I'm just breathing. Good. So now the other thing that I'd like to do, that's kind of like just warming up the tissue, getting used to it. You can even pause for a moment though, and just doing that little bit is like wow, I really feel like that's already changed my breathing. I feel a lot more space through this mid-torso. I almost feel like it's improving my rotation. Okay, so now I also like to just grab the ribs and try to pull back, right? Almost like I'm trying to open up the rib cage. So now when you do something like this, I usually inhale, exhale, get my fingers in place, and I sort of hold my breath while I'm moving my ribs in different directions so that it stays hollowed out. Because as soon as I inhale, my diaphragm activates, right? And it's going to push my fingers out. So when I'm kind of mobilizing like this, I just hold my breath. Inhale, exhale. So as I exhale and hold my breath, I sink under and I just try to move the ribs around. To me, it feels really good to try to open them to the front while I slightly arch my body back. And also it feels really good to go from side to side. And noticing, where do you feel that connecting fascially? Do you feel it all the way down into your hip? Do you feel the side of the body opening? Do you feel it down into the pubic bone? Where do you feel it? Let's try it one more time. Good. Okay, so we were working bilaterally just now, right? But now we're going to really focus on one side at a time. And we're going to see, how does each side feel different? So let's focus on the right side first. So find that midline again, that xiphoid process, and moving just a couple fingers widths to the right side. And we're going to very gently, so here it's going to be very sensitive, uncomfortable. A lot of congestion in there. So I'm not digging deep, I'm not putting my full pressure into this area. I'm just going to hold with a little bit of finger pressure. I'm just going to breathe a couple times. Good. We're going to move like inch by inch to the right side. So here I am. We're just going to go a little bit more. So you'll notice as you move more laterally, more sideways, more out to the sides, it's easier to get under there, right? The organs and the ligaments and the tissues are not as compressed. So when we're going towards the right, what are we running into? I mean, so many things. So a lot of ligamentous attachments between the liver and the diaphragm, a lot of ligamentous attachments between the liver and other organs. So I'll put up a couple pictures for you so that you can sort of see these prominent main ligaments of the liver. In terms of fascial connections, or just thinking about very direct connections in the body, you have this big ligament. We're still in the same spot. Just keep going. You just keep breathing. When I'm talking, you guys just breathe and try to sink in a little bit more on each exhale. So the falciform ligament of the liver is this huge ligament, which you may even be able to feel a little bit. It travels down the liver, sort of bisects the liver, goes behind this linea alba. It sort of becomes contiguous with this ligament that goes around the umbilicus, around the navel, and then it has these branches that go all the way down to the bladder. So this ligament that is up in the liver really directly connects to and helps to support and suspend your bladder. So it's very common to be working up here and to be feeling something down in the lower pelvis. And when we go to stretch, it's definitely common to feel that pull all the way into the pelvis and the anterior hip. So moving over another inch. And always trying to sink on the exhale. That's when you're really going to get underneath. And so I hope you guys are seeing now why it's so important to have short nails. This is really uncomfortable if you have sharp little nails. And then just noticing where you feel congested. It's really common for this to start to activate some peristalsis, to have some organ movement. So you might run into some gas bubbles, you might hear some gurgling. It always helps to lean forward and let gravity kind of help you drop your weight onto your fingers. I know this is not the greatest vantage point. I'm not really sure how to direct the camera so you can see this better. So without getting too specific, we are inevitably running into some of these ligamentous attachments from the liver. Moving over another inch. If you go deep enough, it is possible to palpate the gallbladder. That's pretty readily available. So like I said, if you are having any gallbladder issues, this might be really uncomfortable. If it's very uncomfortable, painful, back out. Just noticing where you feel most stuck. If it feels like organ congestion, which is very common for any of us who have a history of digestive issues, which is me 100%, just hang out there for a few breaths and really breathe into it and see if you can get your fingers to melt into that space a little bit more. Just carving out. So as we go under the ribs, you're feeling the diaphragm kind of up against the front border of the rib cage, right? The diaphragm sort of lines the anterior portion of the rib cage. So I'm feeling it on this part of my fingers. But my finger pads, if I am to continue straight up towards my head, they're running into my liver more. Oh, every once in a while you might have to make that sound. That is a key sound of organ congestion. Ugh, feels a little nasty. So to me it feels nasty, but it's not unbearable and it's certainly not painful. It's not a sharp pain, so I know I can hang out here, and I know that hanging out here and breathing is actually going to help me. But because we're moving stuff around so much, this is also why it's really common to have to go to the bathroom after a session like this. Good, so just taking it out as far as we can. Let's go one more spot. After we do the left side, I'm actually going to have us go into sideline. We'll lie on each side, and we'll start to work on the ligaments that connect, believe it or not, the diaphragm to the large intestine, to the colon, right? So your diaphragm really connects to all of your internal organs. And so there's a lot of different fascial chains and ligamentous attachments throughout the entire abdomen. Oh. So I know I'm not giving great instruction today. As I said, I kind of wanted this to be an informal call and response. Like, I'll do it and show it, and you just try to mimic the best that you can without getting obsessive about our palpation. I mean, the bottom line is there's only so many places to go. And I think if you guys have some sensitivity and really follow, again, what you're feeling inside, it's going to help to guide your hands. Okay, so that's the red side. It's probably looking pretty pink because my fingers were really digging in there. And even with my very short nails, I can still see nail marks. So all of you guys who have a little bit of nail, you're definitely going to see some nail damage there. All right, let's go to the left side. Okay, so we find our midline again, and we're just going a couple fingers widths to the left. And we're just going to fall onto those fingers. So there's not a lot of room for me to get my hand in there. I'm just really gently putting some finger pressure into that area. So your entire esophagus kind of exits to the left, right? So you're kind of I'm really bad with right and left, guys. You're kind of to the right of your esophagus right now. And now I said this is not a smart thing to do right after eating because it's super uncomfortable. However, there are cases where a lot of people's stomachs gets elevated and it gets stuck up under the rib cage. So there is a time and the place to try to get under the left side of the ribs and try to pull the stomach back down manually. And this would be very similar to how you would do it. Okay, and we're going to move over another finger's distance. Trying to collapse under the ribs a little bit more. You can do one hand or both. Sometimes I try to move the ribs and also go underneath them. So we think of the rib cage as this fixed set thing, but it has a lot of mobility. It should have some pliability, some flexibility, some rotation. Oof. So on this side, we're running into the esophagus. We're going to start to run into the greater curve of the stomach, which is why it's particularly uncomfortable after eating. And as we keep moving to the left, we'll also run into some splenic ligaments, right? So you have these gastrosplenic ligaments and gastrosplenic fascia. I'm definitely going to have to put up some images for you guys. I think you'll be overwhelmed by the amount of fascial connections through the chest cavity and through the abdominal cavity. So now I'm moving over another finger's width. And I'm sinking under. So the further out you get, you can really just curl one hand under the rib cage. It's much easier to get under there, especially on the left side for most people. And I'm breathing. You might feel a little bit of a pulse under there. It's coming from the aorta and the heart. You're right underneath the heart. Okay, and moving out one more time. Curling under, so you can really see my left rib cage is so defined, it really sticks out. Sinking under. So again, my fingertips are not just jabbing up towards my head, they're curling under, and I'm palpating the back side of the ribs, right? So that's where those diaphragmatic attachments are going to be on the rib cage. Feels pretty good. And you'll notice my body is naturally leaning onto those fingers, so I'm side bending a little bit onto where my pressure is. Good, so starting to carve out the stomach, starting to carve out the spleen a little bit. Even though the spleen is deeper, you're still going to run into those ligaments a bit. Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm lying on my left side. You make yourself comfortable however you need in side lying. I don't have a lot of props today, but if you need a pillow under your head or a pillow between your knees, that's totally fine. The idea is to be comfortable. So now we kind of left off at the most lateral aspect of the rib cage, and now we're going to kind of follow it down. So let's imagine for a second the orientation of our colon, right? We have an ascending colon on the right, we've got this transverse colon that comes across, and then we've got the descending colon on the left. So now we're going to be focusing on this right side. So if you come from this mid seam of your body, this side seam of the body, and kind of fall in. Really relax your abdomen so that you don't get confused by your obliques and your abdominal muscles. Oh, you start to run into a pretty spongy mass, right? So ascending colon, that's our large intestine. So what I want you to do is, we worked our way out to the side of the rib cage. I want you to curl your fingers under. And you're pressing directly back towards your spine, but now you're also scooping this way. So I'm almost thinking about pulling this colon down a little bit, right? Trying to release the colon a little bit from its diaphragmatic attachments. Trying to create a little bit of space there. So I'm inhaling. I'm exhaling, I'm sinking back towards my spine, and now I'm also dropping my fingers towards the earth. And again, you don't want there to be sharp pain. You're just kind of gently mobilizing the tissue. Good. And we're going to move down again. So we're just going bit by bit, moving our way down. Sinking back towards my spine. And then also just dropping a little bit towards the earth, seeing if you can scoop that tissue a little. It's subtle, you're not going to move your hand that much. Sink in. And sink towards the earth. Even if you just sunk your fingers in and held there for a couple of breaths. I can assure you, you're going to feel a lot different when you stand up. And now let's move down one more time. So, breathing in, breathing out, sinking in, and trying to go a little bit towards the earth. On me, this is feeling very sore, but that's not unusual with my level of digestive issues. Good. And so while we're in side lying, for some of you, it might be actually easier to access getting under the diaphragm in this position. So you can play around with that too, inhaling, exhaling, and just kind of rolling forward. You might find that you can more easily get your fingers under the diaphragm in this position. And what I like about being in this position is now I can also move my pelvis away from my ribs and towards my ribs and really kind of mobilize the ribs in different directions. So you can play around with it a little bit. I'm actually pushing the ribs right now, pulling the ribs. And I really like to get this kind of counter strain with the pelvis. So taking the pelvis into an anterior pelvic tilt, sort of arching back, and getting a little bit of mobility through the ribs. So I know that's not that precise, but as I said at the beginning, I don't want this to be such an anatomically perfect, here are the rules of the modality, this is the only right way to do it. I'm trying to get away from that a little bit and give you guys some options to feel free to explore and be a little bit more intuitive with the movement and feel into what your body needs specifically. Okay, so now we're just going to do that same thing, but on the left side. So we left off kind of at the lateral part of the rib cage. And now we're thinking about finding the side seam on this left side of the body and just digging down a little bit, just kind of palpating with your fingers. So you see my abdomen starts to hang towards the floor, letting those organs kind of get out of the way and sort of noticing what you feel in there. So I'm just kind of working my way from the rib cage down towards the hip. We're feeling for that descending colon. And even just palpating the abdomen gently like this can start to create change, can start to create movement. Okay, good. So you're at the lateral part of this rib cage. We take a breath in. Exhale out, curl under. I'm curling my fingers towards my spine now. Right? I'm bringing them back. And I'm thinking about dropping the fingers towards the floor a little bit, trying to push that tissue out of the way. Taking a few breaths there. So I realize this is very slow and patient work, moving down like a finger's distance, breathing in, exhaling out. Bring the fingers towards the spine and then dropping them towards the earth a little bit. And then just breathing there for a few minutes. So I always have the intention of just doing shorter videos, just including a couple hands-on techniques and then breaking it up into a larger series. But the truth of the matter is once you get in there and you start warming up the tissue, you sort of have to do the whole thing. Or you don't have to do the whole thing, but to start in the middle out of nowhere in another video doesn't really make sense to me. We're kind of already in there, so we might as well get it done. But if you need to break up this video, you totally can. I always include video chapters, so make sure you check out the video description so you can just jump to the parts that you want to do. And let's move down again. So I'm breathing in, breathing out. My fingers are sinking towards my spine and then down towards the earth. like scooping it out. And even if you don't get the direction quite perfect, literally just breathing in, breathing out, sinking your fingers in there and just holding that spot and breathing is going to create some change. You're going to create space. So this is working on the descending colon, right? This is the colodiaphragmatic ligaments on the left side. Okay, and then just very intuitively, if it feels good to you, again, in this space, it might be easier for you to grab your ribs and get underneath because the organs are kind of naturally falling out of the way due to gravity. So breathing in, breathing out. And you can kind of mobilize forward and kind of mobilize back. You can kind of get the pelvis involved. Get the head involved, really arching back. Whatever feels good to you. So if you have healthy bones, don't be afraid to try to mobilize the rib cage. It really feels relieving and it really creates a lot of openness. And I think you'll feel that your breathing changes and also that your digestion changes. And also, not for anything, but low back pain and even mid-back pain. I'll do this a lot to try to relieve any tension that might be contributing to that. So your low back should feel totally different after this session. One more time, just moving the ribs around. Okay, very good. I hope you guys enjoyed that introduction to mobilizing your diaphragm and the surrounding structures. I would love to hear what that experience was like for you, and I would also really like to hear how you're feeling now after that session. If you did run through that entire session with me, then please be very gentle with yourself for the next hour or so. Just pay attention to what you're feeling inside your body, what the results of the session were. Make sure you drink a lot of water. And in fact, if you have the option to take a quick nap in order to better assimilate that work, that would be an awesome idea. If this was your first experience sort of mobilizing around the viscera and the different organs, then know that stuff can come up. As I mentioned in the beginning, this area is a really guarded and protected space that we don't access that often, that we don't touch that often. So when we start to really get our hands in there and move stuff around, it is quite common that a lot of mixed emotions can rise to the surface. So some of you after that session might be feeling really great, energized, more mobile, more easily able to breathe, but others of you might be feeling heavy, lethargic, exhausted, and maybe even a bit sore or tender. Maybe some of you felt like you had to run immediately to the bathroom after this session, and that's totally normal as well, and I think it's a good sign. We are getting shit moving through the system, quite literally. Whatever came up for you, I just ask that you please honor wherever you're at this moment and really give yourself maybe the next 24 hours to truly evaluate what kind of effect this session had on you systemically, physiologically, emotionally, whatever it is. Really taking the time to observe and notice what the true effects are for you personally. And then also, please feel free to reach out to me if you need to talk about any of this further, or if you have any specific questions or comments. Besides leaving comments below this video, you can always feel free to email me directly. I'm usually pretty quick about responding. And finally, please let me know if you'd like to see more videos like this one introducing more self-massage techniques. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to my channel. Also, if this was a meaningful experience for you, please consider sharing this video with others. Also, be sure to check out my totally free Breath Basics 6-Day Challenge. If you want to deep dive into functional breathing theory and exercises, then my next 4-week breath bootcamp starts in March, and I've decided to offer my YouTube viewers a 20% off discount. So if you'd like to take advantage of that, you can always use code BOOTCAMP20 at checkout. And then also be sure to check out my private online Be Light community. Lastly, if you'd like to donate to my channel and help support the growth of Be Light, you may do so by visiting my Buy Me a Coffee page. Thank you so much for watching and for exploring with me today. I hope to see you next time.